I've been waiting, wait. No, I'm not waiting for the world to change. Things are really moving, change is on the way. Maybe it's got something to do with Venus today. This is the 13th. Venus moves into Leo. Leo. Experimentation. Also on this day, the 13th, Saturday, Mercury, which has been out of bounds since the 22nd of May, comes back in bounds. And the moon, something's got to be out of bounds. On this day, the moon goes out of bounds. So there's always that out of bounds consideration that's in the mix. Not always, but it is right now. So how do we want to play this game? This is today. Probably the major factor that is going to be transpiring this week is that Venus down there, just coming into Leo. What is Leo? Leo, ruled by the sun. You can feel a radiant kind of energy. I think, put me on a stage. Put me on the highway, and I'll show you a sign. That Venus, how we interact with one another. How does our artistic engine get inspired? Well, from a Leonian perspective, it's like, put me in a situation, show me a sign, allow that to be the stage of life, and I am going to rise. The energy of interaction that potentially is right there ready to be expressed is not generally going to hold itself back. If you consider just from the archetypal fifth house of that Leo signature and Venus, how we interact with other people. I'm just going to read you a couple words from one of my mentors, Kelly Lee Phipps. Rest in peace, my friend. What you create as an individual determines what you can share with your friends and the community at large. The fifth realm is about tuning into the power of your creative fire. Zeus, Jupiter, gave birth to Athena from his head. The fifth realm describes the inner child that is pulsating within you, anxious to be born. These energies will indicate how you contact and elevate this playful, magical force. They also describe your romantic, love-making style and the kind of experiences that will bring you pleasure. That's today we're talking about. So many ways to go with these. I'm playing with my my Astro deck. It's got lots of cards. Oh, that's interesting. Because it's green, it's basically just reflecting back the image that's in the background. Yeah, got writing front. Can't see the front unless I turn to just the right angle. There we go. Almost got it. Yeah, don't worry about it. Astrodex. Um, as we complete the week that we're in, which we're getting really close to it, the new moon tomorrow sets in motion what? The sun shifting from Gemini. Oh no, not yet. Because this happens at 24 degrees of Gemini. Yeah, this is tomorrow. You can kind of see the sun's at 23 degrees, moon's at 16. The sun catches up with, the moon catches up with the sun at 24 degrees around 8 o'clock in the evening, Sunday. We're being asked, that song that I began this whole thing with, waiting for the world to change? No, not waiting for the world to change. What is change? When you look at each quadrant of the chart, a quadrant being 3 houses, it changes more of a house thing than a sign thing because any of the signs can change. The first house in any quadrant, this is initiation. Something is getting started. There's a potential for new birth to, erupt onto the scene. Second house is a fixed sign. It says, okay, well, that whatever the experience was has, it has moved in. Let's try and format it in such fashion that we can utilize it. Then you get to the third houses, the last of any quadrant. These are the houses of change. The third house, sixth house, ninth house, 12th house. We're in a Gemini cycle right now, at least for a few more days. Oh, right to the end of next week, the week that's coming ahead. And change. What kind of changes do you think are I'm going to just say it, ready to erupt? And I use that term very explicitly because of Uranus. Uranus, of all the planets, it represents change, but it's not the kind of change that is evolutionary over long periods of time. Oh, no, not. It is radical, ruptured, revolutionary change. Since its entrance into Gemini, our potential region of curiosity of our thoughts and actions, the whole experience of change from the Gemini perspective is that, can you feel the potential restlessness that Uranus being in Gemini for the first time in 84 years has, basically stirring the pot of life, stirring that cauldron of potential to ask us questions that perhaps we weren't ready for, or we just didn't expect them to happen quite so radically suddenly. We're in Gemini for the rest of this next week until Sunday, the 21st, which is the changeover to Cancer. So let's not waste the opportunity for being awake enough that when the evidence points to the requirement for change, we don't become lazy, laid back, not really willing to do things, No, no, not. This is an energy that requires the impulse of life to, rattle the cage. There are things afoot that need change, and not in just a minor fashion. So, anyway, back to our Venus, because Venus is going to do an interesting dance this week. That's the one planet that I'm going to focus on, other than the new moon on Sunday. Venus being now, here it is. It's just entered Leo, How are we going to interact with other people? Well, you might... I think of, this, I'm just float these images as they come through my head. I'm thinking dance, but I'm not just thinking any dance. I'm thinking like a tap dance, something that has got some impulsive action to it, some rhythm, that wants to make you not stand still by any stretch of the imagination. Tuesday comes along. See, this Venus is at 3 degrees. You notice what it's moving up on? It's moving up on a trine to Neptune. What could happen should? It's going to happen anyway. When this trine happens between Neptune and Venus. On this day, Wednesday, our thoughts our impulses. I'm using impulse quite particularly because we've just begun a new lunar cycle, and you might notice that the moon and Venus are about to hold hands in a very tight fashion here on Wednesday morning. The emotional feeling side of that capacity, the Venusian capacity to, how was that thing that Kelly Phipps mentioned about that energy of, Leo? There's, the curiosity factor is afoot to, try and make something develop in the realm of relationship that is perhaps experimental. It's got a drive, solar drive, because it is the sun that we're talking about that rules Leo, to, not just sit around and, wait for the world to go on by. No, we're not waiting for the world to change. We're being the change. Well, this Venus in trine to Neptune, keep in mind, this is Neptune we're talking about. So the potential for, our imagination to get carried away, or at the same time, what can transpire is you get this, Neptunian fog settling down over everything, so clarity is not necessarily right at the epitomal point of the interaction space between people. I'm using the Venus factor here. So be or utilize at least a little bit of caution if that Venusian Leonian kind of energy is saying, I need to strike out. I need to check out the potential, what is going to work out between me and this other person. Neptune in trine. Well, it's not necessarily a hard aspect, but how clearly are you seeing the situations? I might suggest being just a little bit more ginger in how it is that you confront that kind of a situation between you and someone else. on this Wednesday to make sure that you're at least remotely on similar pages. Excuse me. It doesn't automatically indicate that things aren't going to work out between you. One of the factors that could have a bearing on it is how attuned are each of you to your spiritual perspective. There's a Neptunian kind of a consideration that, oftentimes gets portrayed or what should we call it? Expressed along the lines of confusion or fog or not being that clear. But that is from the human ego level of perspective, not necessarily the spiritual side of Neptune. That is where people get confused, is because they haven't really tuned in effectively to what it means to be spirit. No, spirit is kind of like one of those floaty kind of experiences that's just out there. But from the human nature, ego perspective, trust in spirit, not necessarily right on the top of the pile of potential ways to follow the spiritual dance. So, can you see the potential for fog and misinterpreted kinds of experiences versus a spiritual intensity and focus that is about something so much larger, so much more intimate, so entwined into the very fabric of life. If in this Venus-Neptune trine experience, that level of interaction is, crossed into the spiritual realm, I would definitely say there could be something extremely magical potential in how it is you interact with someone else, or maybe just with others. After all, Venus doesn't necessarily mean a specific person. And the reality of partnership, Venus, really is how in tune are you to the partnership that you have with yourself. Because that is the focal point that actually sets in motion how partnership could unfold. After all, I am attempting to be in a partnership with somebody else. At the same time, if I don't know who I am, then the potential for confusion, misleading perspectives as to what it is that we came together for, it's amplified because I don't know who I am. And I'm trying to engage with somebody else that, with any luck knows who they are. But is that a guarantee? These are factors that you have to weigh out in any interchange that you have with others. Well, that's not all that Venus is doing today. Let's go to Thursday. As Venus went from Wednesday to Thursday, it crossed over. Let's go back a day here. Venus at 4 degrees 51. Okay, so on Wednesday, while we're having this Venus-Neptune dance, Venus is also in the process of forming an opposition to Pluto up there in Aquarius. Now, what do you suppose a Venus-Pluto opposition could bring into the consideration field. Well, Venus is, it's percolating. It's in Leo. The experience of exploration and adventure, partnerships, romance. These are the things that Venus and Leo are kind of like clicking on all cylinders for. The opposition to Pluto, as well as that Neptunian trine that's going on, you could say one potential is it's throwing a monkey wrench into the gears of what it is that is potential in that realm of relationship. That's only one perspective. Now, Pluto can do that, but you have to ask yourself, how tuned am I into the Plutonic dance moves? Well, Pluto is, it's not really interested in that surfacey kind of level process of, from the Venus perspective, of the interaction game. Because Pluto really is about plumbing the depths. It wants to, look under the surface, turn over the rocks or the boards or whatever's there to see what's underneath. What's the foundation that this is trying to be built upon? Pluto will, dig down and expose factors that may not be readily seen in any process. One thing to keep in mind is Pluto's in Aquarius. So the realm of the collective, Aquarius, is essentially being overturned in some fashion by this Plutonic energy to make sure that the reason or reasons that people are drawn together into groups and collectives is to, from the Aquarius perspective, because we have similar wavelengths of process at work within us, and that's why we came together. Pluto says, yeah, that's good, but, how deep are you willing to dig into why it is that you were brought together at this time? Is your foundation solid? This Venus opposite Pluto that takes place on Thursday this week is asking you very specifically, is the foundation of why we might engage with one another in an Leonian explorative type nature to, potentially put on a show. There's our Leo, the sun, of radiance, to see what kind of energy might be stirred further afield. There's our Aquarius, further afield. The group, the collective energy, paying attention to the show that Leo is putting on. And Pluto over there is saying, I'm not just going to pay attention to this surfacey kind of experience of what you're putting on to, be entertaining. I want to know why. I want to know what's the root cause? What's the dynamic that is potentially there that you may or may not be aware of yourselves? I'm going to ask you to dig a bit deeper into that process so that, what comes across carries weight, has the capability of redefining how we see ourselves in a path going forward that has more of a longevity signature to it than just a flash in the pan kind of entertaining hourly, daily, weekly effect. And the moon being right there with Venus on this Wednesday is going into Thursday is saying, I want you to sense, feel, be aware of how your outward expression, Leo, and that solar radiance from the new moon that we just initiated in Gemini, stirring the pot of curiosity and creativity. Can you sense that? Do you see that the intention that was set at that new moon in Gemini has enough curiosity to continue to ask questions no matter what is transpiring? You know, yeah, I can see that that cauldron of life is, it needs some good stirring, and that's what this Leo, Venus, and Moon conjunction are providing, a good, strong stirring stick. And then, the rest of the week, we just go on to the end of the week. On the end of the week, what do we have? The sun going into Cancer. The hats have just been changed. And remember, change, third house, change, fourth house, initiation, before we get into the fixity of utilizing that we've changed into. And then again, the sixth house, the third house in that quadrant says, are you ready to change? Are you ready to prepare yourself for the next initiation moment? Sun going into Cancer, an initiating moment, the invitation into the heart and hearth of the home and family, our roots, our connection to Mother, our connection to our ancestral lineage, home. As we end this week, home is going to become a lot more relevant as we go forward with an initiation into really looking quite specifically at this home experience on all levels that we're being invited to participate in. That's all I'm going to have for this week. And keep your options open. It's likely that Venus factor in this upcoming week is going to, spin some interesting characters into your world. Pay attention, Are they coming in, sailing on a foggy ship, not necessarily having a particular direction in mind? Or might they have the intention of inviting you into a level of spiritual awareness that perhaps you've been waiting to show up all along? So, we'll end where we started. I'm not waiting for the world to change. Things are really moving. Change is on the way. I know I don't get that actual do. Anyway, Have a good week. If you got any questions, I can always fabricate an answer, but a fabricated answer should have some relevance to why it is that you and I were drawn together in the first place. Ciao for now.